Audsley, and I am the managing director at Sundog Poetry Center. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to let a few more people in from the waiting room. Please make sure your audio is on mute. You have the option of viewing the people in the gallery or to switch to speaker mode to see the speaker in full on your screen. Okay. Just letting in a couple more people. Thanks for your patience. I want to check and make sure your audio is on mute. Great. Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Sarah Audsley and I'm the managing director of Sundog Poetry Center. We are located in the northern state of Vermont, or I am located in the northern state of Vermont, let me just say. But Sundog Poetry's mission is to promote poetry for the enrichment of our cultural lives, to support Vermont poets in their development through workshops, readings, and publications, and to cultivate in Vermont audiences of all ages a love and appreciation of this art through a variety of poetry programming. And that, which is why we're all gathered here tonight. And we do try to promote poetry for all Vermonters. And so we think of ourselves both regionally in the northern part, but also connecting down to the southern state where Diana is. Diana Whitney is here tonight, is the editor of the anthology, You Don't Have to Be Everything, Poems for Girls Becoming Themselves, sorry. And I'm happy to have Diana Whitney here, Joy Ladin, and MJ Fievre, two contributors to the anthology that Diana has edited. The way things are going to roll tonight is I'm going to introduce the editor and poet, Diana Whitney, and then she's going to talk about the conception of the anthology, how it came to be, and then she'll introduce the two poets who contribute to the anthology who will read tonight. And then there'll be a short conversation which I can moderate from the chat, or you can ask questions directly. Joy has to leave directly after her reading. She has a Seder to attend. Happy Passover to everyone who celebrates. Thank you for joining us tonight. Diana Whitney writes across genres in Vermont with a focus on feminism, motherhood, and sexuality. Her first book, Wanting It, became an indie bestseller and won the Ruby Book Award in Poetry. For years, she was the poetry critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, where she featured women authors and LGBTQ voices in her column. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Glamour, the Washington Post, the Kenyon Review, and many more. A feminist activist in her hometown and beyond, Diana advocates for survivors of sexual violence and fights for the rights of women and girls. Thank you so much for being here, Diana. I am going to drop in some links into the chat. One of them is a link to purchase the anthology, You Don't Have to Be Everything, Poems for Girls Becoming Themselves. Also, our three readers tonight, you'll also find their links to their websites there. I'm going to turn it over to you, Diana, and I'm going to make you the host so you can screen share.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm just so happy to be here. I'm feeling like really grateful to everyone showing up despite Zoom fatigue after a whole year to celebrate this book. And it's really exciting to hold it in my hands. I'm so thrilled to have Joy Ladin and MJ Fievre here with me. And I love Sundog Poetry Center. I first got involved with Sundog, I think back in 2015 when I did a craft lecture, Poets in Their Craft. And then I was actually part of an anthology that Sundog did, which I highly recommend. So it's wonderful to be here. And I thought I'm going to talk a little about the origin of this project. And I'll share my screen because I think a lot of you probably haven't actually seen the book, and it is illustrated. So giving you the full experience of how the poems work together with the illustrations. And I will read 2 short poems and then turn it over to the other poets and really encourage you to, you know, if you think of questions, we'd really love to engage with you after the reading part, although we also have questions for each other. So I've been working on this project for about 2 years, a little longer, although I say I've actually been working on it since I was 13 years old. That was, it was really challenging for me, like a lot of us being a teen girl. And when this project came to me, it felt like a calling, like something that I had to do. That what I wanted was to bring together the voices I wish that I'd heard when I was a teen, and to really encourage the readers, the young readers, girls, young women, to embrace the complexity and the fullness of who they are and really give a message of you are enough. And the process of compiling the voices, of choosing the poems, you know, it took a long time, and it was challenging. Some poems came easily, some, and I'll talk about this when I introduce Joy and MJ, you know, they had many wonderful poems, and it was hard to even choose which was the right one to go into the book. So I'm gonna go ahead and share. This is always a little bit of an awkward transition. I made some slides for this, instructed by my daughters, who are Generation Z, they're digital natives. And I'm gonna present, all right. So you don't have to do everything, Poems for Girls, Becoming Themselves. I wanted to collect the voices I wished I'd heard when I was a teen. And what we decided to do, I worked together with my editor at Workman, was to divide the anthology into 8 chapters according to emotion. And initially I was resistant to this. I actually wanted, I was approaching a little more poetically. I wanted to do something like the elements, fire, earth, wind, and air, you know, fire, earth, air, and water, and kind of do poems according to their images. And really Workman said, no, we really see this more, a little more concrete with these emotions. And it ended up being a great organizing principle. So the book opens with seeking, and you'll see, sorry, I'm trying to move forward here. There we go. So the very first poem in the book is Stephanie Burt, wonderful poet and critic, Harvard professor. Her poem is Final Exam, Stephanie. And it's a reimagining of her own girlhood. Loneliness, which is really a kind of defining part of growing up. And, you know, for a lot of us, it's been a central part of the past year. I know it has been for me. The poems in this chapter are really speaking to that experience and showing that you're not alone in your loneliness. And I'm just giving one example from each chapter. There's 68 poems in the book. Franny Choi, her poem Solitude, and it starts with, I hope no one comes to my party, which I just love that. And it ends with an amazing image. Attitude, it's really one of my favorite chapters. And you'll notice that the book is illustrated. There were 3 illustrators who we ended up choosing. Initially, Workman only wanted one. She was also a white woman like me. And I said, no, that's not gonna cut it. We need to have really more varied perspectives, and also kind of like a different way of viewing through art and through the image. So there's this one, I believe this illustration is by Cristina Gonzalez, who is a Latinx illustrator, I believe based in Ecuador. And in the attitude chapter, we have Maya Angelou, and then I was obviously thrilled to have a poem by our youth poet laureate and inaugural poet Amanda Gorman, who I've been following her career for a few years. And it was amazing to get to, she actually sent through her agents, I think 5 poems for me to choose from. And I chose Black Daughter's Pointillism, which is this wonderful poem in the shape of a girl. Rage, another very key emotion to being a teen girl. I guess being a teenager, but I really wanted to give girls permission, if you're raised to be nice, that you could express rage, that you can engage with these poems and these poets who are expressing rage in this very powerful but controlled way on the page. And that our anger could actually be a catalyst for our creative art and can catalyze action. And I'm just going to read this poem here. It's one of my favorites from the Rage chapter. The poet is Melissa Stein. It's called Harder. If you're going to storm, I said, do it harder. Pummel nests from limbs and drown the furred things in their dens. Swell creek to flood, unhome the fish. Everything's gone too cozy. Winnow, flush. Let's see what's got the will. Let's watch what's tender, choke or breathe. Try to make a mark on me. Really kind of wanted to imagine a reader thinking about that line, kind of final line, like almost like a self-protection spell. Try to make a mark on me. The longing chapter. So I included one of my own poems in the longing chapter, which may be considered an editorial faux pas in certain circles. But I will say, I'm actually letting some people into the waiting room. So if you're just joining us, welcome. And I'm just going through the book, screen sharing by showing the different illustrations and reading some poems as I go. But longing, I guess you could say it's kind of my wheelhouse. It's one of my obsessions as a poet and a writer. So my own poem, Wanting It, I decided to include it really because it was right on topic. It's based in high school. And it has all of those desires and power struggles and confusions. Wonderful poem in this chapter by Cameron Awkward-Rich called Meditations in an Emergency. Shame. So that's one of the opportunities that we had in terms of the dividing by emotion was really to do these emotions, which are kind of taboo, that we don't always look head on. And shame is one of those. And, shame is also, it's the opposite of the message of you are enough. Shame is that you can never be enough. Brené Brown talks about having shame resilience, and that by shining a light on shame, it lessens. So the poems that I wanted to include here were poems that addressed shame in many different specters. So, and there's a little tiny shame poem, one of my favorites. Nikita Gill is a UK poet, an Anglo-Indian poet. She's also an Instagram poet. And part of this project for me was to have really across the board a wide range of voices and not really make distinction between popularity and quality. And which I think can definitely happen and within literary circles. Nikita Gill writes these fabulous feminist retellings of myths and fairy tales. And she also has 600,000 followers on Instagram. So you can imagine how many people are reading and engaging with her poems on a daily basis. So in the shame chapter, I chose this little tiny poem called Wolf and Woman. Some days I am more wolf than woman, and I'm still learning how to stop apologizing for my wild. And apologizing is something that girls and women do a lot. I have a lot of I'm sorry's in my house, and I hear them come out of my mouth. And so that message of you can stop apologizing, wanted to bring that in here. Sadness. And I will say we'll get to hear MJ, her poem is in the sadness chapter. This is one of my favorite illustrations of the whole book. Another one of my favorite poems from the sadness chapter by J.P. Howard, What to Say to a Friend Who Wants to Give Up. And I will say I've been the speaker of this poem. I have spoken these words to a beloved, to a family member, and I've also been the spoken to in this poem. I've struggled with severe cyclical depression, and I've been there, and this poem really captures that. The final chapter is belonging, and that's actually where Joy's poem falls, and we'll get to hear her next. And also what Mary Oliver's Wild Geese, that first line, you do not have to be good, that line was actually almost like the seed that gave birth, that sprouted the whole project here. Actually was supposed to be the title of the book, You Do Not Have to Be Good, but believe me, I tried very hard. You cannot get permission to use you cannot excerpt anything from a Mary Oliver. She left very explicit directions to her estate and to her agent. So that was not possible, but still the message is here. This is one of the final poems in the book. And you've probably heard this one before, but I wanted to bring this to girls and to readers. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. And those are lines that we can all hear again and again, but I really believe especially girls and women can hear that. And then the very last poem in the book, and I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll read it directly to you, is by our new poet laureate, U.S. poet laureate, Joy Harjo, the first Indigenous poet laureate. She's from the Muskogee Creek Nation. And it's this beautiful poem called For Keeps. So I'm going to open that up and read it. And I went to visit my mother yesterday. My mother has advanced Alzheimer's, and she just got her vaccine. She's fully vaccinated. It's been the 2 weeks, and I've now visited her twice, and I brought her my book. And I signed a copy. She's nonverbal, and mostly, she can't walk anymore. Keeps her eyes closed most of the time. But I sat and I read her poems from this book, and I read her this poem, and I read her Joy's poem and MJ's poem, and it felt in the quality of reading poetry aloud that some stillness happened in the listening, and I felt like she received the words. And this poem particularly seemed to speak like almost to exist between two worlds. For Keeps by Joy Harjo. Sun makes the day new. Tiny green plants emerge from earth. Birds are singing the sky into place. There is nowhere else I want to be but here. I lean into the rhythm of your heart to see where it will take us. We gallop into a warm southern wind. I link my legs to yours and we ride together toward the ancient encampment of our relatives. Where have you been? They ask. And what has taken you so long? That night, after eating, singing, and dancing, we lay together under the stars. We know ourselves to be part of mystery. It is unspeakable. It is everlasting. It is for keeps. So that's the final poem in this collection. And I'm really excited now to hear from two of the poets. I'm going to introduce Joy Harjo, and then she'll read her poem and hopefully another new one. I actually was introduced to Joy in my role as the poetry critic for the San Francisco Chronicle. Her book, Fireworks in the Graveyard, which I have right here, it arrived in the mail as an advanced reader's copy. And I fell in love with it. The poems were just so beautiful. They're meditative and earthy and really just deeply engaged with nature. And I'm going through the book again thinking I'm a dog-earer, and I like almost every poem in the Fireworks in the Graveyard dog-eared. And so I also, what's interesting is that this book is published by Headmistress Press, and coincidentally, here we are, there's another poem in You Don't Have to Be Everything by the founder of Headmistress Press, Mary Miriam. So I found that a wonderful, just a synchronicity, and there've been a lot of synchronicities like that. So Joy Ladin is the Gottesman Chair in English at Yeshiva University, and the first and still only openly transgender employee of an Orthodox Jewish institution. She has published 9 books of poetry, a memoir of gender transition, the National Book Award finalist Through the Door of Life, and the Lambda Literary and Triangle Award finalist, The Soul of the Stranger, Reading God and Torah from a Transgender Perspective. So please welcome Joy Ladin, and I'm excited to hear what she reads. And please put any questions that you're thinking of into the chat.
Thank you so much, Diana. It was a thrill to get your email saying that you wanted to include me in this anthology. And that was before I had any idea how beautiful the book was going to be, or what incredible company I was being invited into. I'm quite thrilled, and it's great to be here with you. And I just want to apologize for having to run out, but you know, Jewish time doesn't mesh well with secular time in a lot of different ways. This is one of them. The poem that I'm going to read, actually, it's also amazing to be in the section called Belonging, because I feel like that is something I never felt when I was growing up. I never felt any sense of belonging. And I'm not even positive I know how to feel belonging. So, so I feel like you're telling me that there's a potential there that I have yet to fulfill. This poem is one of an embarrassing number of poems that I wrote using words that I found in Cosmo Girl magazine, the now defunct teen girl version of Cosmopolitan magazine. Didn't have the scary pictures of, you know, perfect bodies on the cover or anything like that, but for some reason in that magazine, I found all of these words for experiences and feelings and sensations that I had felt I had to cut myself off from when I was living as a man. So this is one of those poems, and it's called Survival Guide. No matter how old you are, it helps to be young when you're coming to life, to be unfinished, a mysterious statement, a journey from star to star. So break out a box of Crayolas and draw your family looking uncomfortably away from the you you've exchanged for the mannequin they named. You should help clean up, but you're so busy being afraid to love or not. You're missing the fun of clothing yourself in the embarrassment of life. Frost your lids with midnight, lid your heart with frost. Rub them all over, the hormones that regulate the production of love from karmic garbage dumps. Turn yourself into the real you can only discover by being other. Voila, you're free. Learn to love the awkward silence you are going to be. The poems that came out of Cosmo Girl are all like, they're in the second person, and I realized early on that this was being written to me like from a future self, from the person I was trying to become or grow into. I will just want to read one more poem. It's not published. It's from a book in progress of poems spoken by the Shekhinah, which is the mystical Jewish term for the female aspect of God. And the Shekhinah is the part of God that feels, that lives with us, that feels what every individual feels and experiences what we experience. And these poems are also made partly out of Cosmo language, but this time grown-up cosmopolitan, paired with chapters from the prophet Isaiah. So the Cosmo article that this poem draws on is called "Why This Woman is Proud to be Known as the Pageant Queen Without a Uterus." And the Isaiah chapter starts, "Sing out, O barren one who has not given birth." The poem is called Singing, and it's addressed by the Shekhinah to each one of us. Before you were a fetus, before you were an egg, you were a song I was already singing, a promise I'd already kept. I stretch out your curtains, strengthen your pegs, make room inside you for the world I created you to share. You are my embryo, and I am your womb. You are my labor pains, and I'm the mother pushing you to cry, to talk, to stand for something, to stop being scared of the joy you feel rising like waters in the days of Noah, flooding your foundations, crowning your head, answering every question I created you to ask. Why you mistake affliction for love, and love, my love, for affliction. Why you feel incomplete, like a tiara without a pageant. Why you just start crying, when for a moment you hear me singing the secret you forget you're keeping, that before your mother was even conceived, I married my being to your becoming, that you are the child of a queen. I know, no matter what I say or do, it's always the first time for you, the first shaking of your mountains, the first bursting into flame, the very first season of your first reality show, in which a queen with a whirlwind where a uterus should be keeps asking if this will be the show when you say I do to the love, my love, that never stops singing and follows you everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Oh, it's so really powerful to, I love that new poem, and to hear Survival Guide out loud, and to hear the origins of it from Cosmo Girl. I actually feel like I've seen Cosmo Girl in the past, and glad it's gone. For people who haven't seen the book, actually the first two stanzas of Survival Guide, the designer chose them to go on the back of the book. And it's really, yeah. So I love hearing the origin of that amidst the stars of the back of the book. A mysterious statement, a journey from star to star. So we're so happy that you could join us, and then it's, please go have a wonderful Seder, and we'll connect with you. And so, yeah, for everybody who wants to, I just can't recommend more to go and find some more of Joy's poems. And I think you can look in the chat. Sarah's put some links to find her work that's been published online, or look at other books. So,
thank you, Diana and MJ. I hope I'll catch you reading another time.
All right, take
Bye.
care. So I'm gonna introduce MJ now, and it was the same thing where a book arrived in the mail, and it's lucky. Well, when you're a poetry reviewer, this happens a lot, and it's at first it was really exciting, and then it's mostly guilt-inducing because there's no way you can keep up with it. And if if I showed you like around my study, you'd there's literally just towers of books on the floor, and yeah. So, but books come, and this one is called Happy Okay: Poems about Anxiety, Depression, Hope, and Survival. And I knew okay, yeah, this book I have to read. Because really suffered with from depression my whole life, especially really starting that time when I was 13, that kind of formative time when that I write about. I actually realized I meant to read to you guys from the introduction of You Don't Have to Be Everything, but there wasn't really time. So, but I do share the story of being a 13-year-old girl in the closet, being a queer bi girl, and not being able to admit that to myself or to my friends or to anybody else. And so yeah, cyclical depression and anxiety. And here's somebody who wrote a whole book, and it's a fabulous book. And to be honest, it took me a long time to decide which poem I wanted to include. The poem that I chose, which is, I'm gonna forget exactly the title. I will self-talk, right? So it's from this Happy Okay manifesto. And there are all these wonderful ones. I will remember the motion of the moon. I will let myself be loved. But MJ will read to you from the one that made it into the book in the sadness chapter. MJ Fievre is the author of 10 books in French, a memoir about her childhood in Haiti during the brutal regime of Jean-Bertrand Aristide, and Happy Okay, poems about anxiety, depression, hope, and survival. She helps others write their way through trauma, build community, and create social change. Her latest book is Badass Black Girl, Questions, Quotes, and Affirmations for Teens. Welcome, MJ Fievre.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited about getting a copy of the book. I don't have it yet, but it's so beautiful. And I was thinking that so many pages would be perfect in my office framed. It's a work of art. It's really beautiful. Thank you, Diana, for putting it together. So I'm going to read I Will Practice Self-Talk. When depression brings a chill that settles inside me, a marrow-deep tremor, when the impulse of fear burns my palms, I'll tell myself stories about the village of my youth, where days were sunny and mild, the skies a cheerful eggshell blue, where the river shivered bright rubble, and sisters lured each other out into the sunshine. I'll describe out loud the 2-hour hike up a steep, rocky mountain trail among the happy fuchsia of bougainvillea, the acacias that cross their limbs along the roads, the walls of jasmine, their dark branches covered with white corollas, the lady of night vines opening their bluebells in the evening. I will tell myself that those sisters climbed a mountain with their strong legs, and that one pair of those legs are mine. And next I'm going to read, since we're on the topic of sisterhood and really thinking about my teenage years during the pandemic, I realized how important it was for me to have my sisters with me to survive my teenage years, my childhood, and we stayed really connected during the pandemic. I haven't seen any of my 3 sisters in a year since the pandemic started, partly because 2 of them are still in Haiti, and one of them has a daughter with who is immunocompromised. So I stayed away for safety reasons. The poem that I'm going to read is titled, I Will Let Myself Be Loved. In photos with my sister, I am always bigger, heavier, thicker boned, toughless in the way I claim space. She is skinny, but fills the air beyond the boundaries of a delicate frame. My sister is water to my fire, She's the yin to my shambolic yang. When inordinate rage builds within me, when my fury comes like 100 horns and 100 bells, my nerves a chorus of plucked strings, a quiver of quivering. When the blood in my fingertips pulse and my jaws cramp from clenching tight to keep my screams quiet from the night, she is safety, warmth, and temperance in a dangerous world. A world in which I can never trust myself, because even a day that seems mundane holds in its purposeful or dreamy breaths the possibility of rage. The heaves from my body terribly loud, frightening. My sister hugs me and I let her, and I hold on, her heartbeat against my chest. It's beautiful, crazy boom boom, a drum beating, a cup of sparking fireflies. As I cry, her fingers nestle in the ridges of my spine. Not all arms are an oasis, but some arms can span the vast contradictions of who I am, and they hold me safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, MJ. I love that sister poem. And I was being honest, I'm not just waxing rhapsodic. It really was very hard for me to make choices. And I think I narrowed it down to 2 different poems in Happy Okay. And I read them. So I have 2 teen daughters who are 13 and 15, and they found themselves having to like be kind of a voting block for Generation Z. And I would say, like, which one should I choose? So I will practice self-talk seem to be the winner. Well, I'm wondering if we're ready to go right into Q&A, or if I should read like one more poem from the book. I don't know. What is it? What do people think? I'm happy to be here with you all tonight, and whatever the mood is, to have a little more poetry and then talk.
I know that personally, I would love for you to read another one, Diana.
Okay. It's funny. I had to decide about putting my own poem in. I did hear from a poet I respected that it wasn't something that was done, and I had to think about that. And then actually I called my friend James Cruz, who's a wonderful poet and an experienced editor of anthologies, and I talked with him about it, and he's like, yeah, I include my own poem. And for me, I think I decided that part of the mission of the book for girls was that we deserve to take up space, that they deserve to take up space, and that our stories matter. And so also because my poem was set in high school, and because it was just right on for the longing chapter. So why don't I read Wanting It, and then maybe one more from the belonging chapter, because I will tell you, those were the poems I ended up mostly reading to my mom when I was with her yesterday, and like they're kind of like the heart poems that we need to hear, especially during hard times. So here's Wanting It. Wasn't I desperate? Sorry, let me start again. I caught myself about to apologize to those of you who've heard this poem way too many times. And then I thought, you know what? No more apologies. So take 2. Wanting It. Wasn't I beautiful? Wasn't I desperate? Didn't I give a shit about world peace, inner peace? Only wanting it, secret graffiti, spelled out in lip gloss on the locker room wall. The new underwire bit into my ribs, pushed me up, and I caught the mirror, wanted it, cocked a hip, wanted it, front seat, back seat, down on the floor, brag of bruises blooming like plums on my neck, tender, bad, and legitimate. I wanted to ditch it, wanted to drive, alone in the car for the first time, silence. Such concentration, my hands tongued the wheel. I could see the brushstroke of each yellow line, could feel my tires crush pieces of gravel, and my 10 toes alive inside my shoes, firm and quick on the pedals. There was an orange lodged underneath the clutch. Squeeze it and shift, squeeze it and there. Those boys who juice the halls with slouch and threw their bodies around the field, they watched when I punched it to second, third, burned my tracks along the high school tar. They looked at me as if I could kill them. They wanted to kill me back against a locker. I could feel my body jammed up on metal, my skin in ridges where the grates dug in, my skirt hiked up, my muscles like fish, my third eye watching from the outside in. I was some other girl. I was anyone's candy. Realized that reading this, it's about learning to drive stick shift, which my 15-year-old is right now. And that's, I guess, a more rare experience nowadays where most cars have an automatic transmission, but like the very physical experience of depressing the clutch and like that kind of delicacy with the orange and engaging with the body, this new experience of freedom and independence of being in the car for the first time, like that was a real catalyst for this poem. So I'll read one more from the belonging chapter, and then we'll talk. Maybe I'll read the whole Wild Geese. Because the geese are, at least where I am, in southern Vermont, the geese are coming back. You can see them returning and landing in the fields. Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. So thank you, Mary Oliver, wonderful poet. Well, I would love to invite anyone in the audience to ask a question. You can write it in the chat. Sarah's going to moderate. And I'll just dive in right now because they're questions that I've been wanting to ask MJ. Really, when did you start writing poetry? Do you remember your first poems, and did you share them with anyone?
I do remember my first poems. I have to say that growing up in Haiti, I always felt that poetry was a very male universe. Many of the writers that we learned about, Haitian writers, were mostly old males. So I never really thought that I was going to write poetry ever. I mean, I enjoyed reading it. And when I did start, I was in my teenage years, and it was the usual love poems because I have a crush on a boy. And I didn't take myself seriously. I didn't take the poem seriously until much later, when I started reading poetry as play. We in Haiti we study a lot of French literature, and studying people like Molière or um, other scriptwriters who also wrote in poetry format really inspired me to be more interested in the theatrical part of poetry, poetry being read out loud, poetry being put in scenes. That's when I really felt it in me that I wanted to write poems, poems that could tell a story with beginning, middle, and end, because I loved fiction so much, and I was excited at this prospect of mixing the two. What about you, Diana?
That's yeah, I mean, I started writing poems in well, we called it junior high. Back then in the 80s, it was junior high. Now it's middle school, which has a like a more eloquent ring to it. But I used to write stories when I was like in elementary school, like long kind of fantasy stories. And then in junior high, I switched to poetry, and I actually describe in the introduction, being kind of paralyzed with shame and depression, and then like channeling it into a poem. Like there was a real sense of an emotional release. And I was really lucky that I had this mom who, I was the oldest of four, and she would read to us, through our whole childhood. And anytime I would bring her something that I read, she would just tell me she loved it, which, if you have kids, no matter what the quality is of what they bring to you, just say that you love it. And, that for me was just, the encouragement I needed just to keep going, not to think that, I was going to be some famous writer, but just that it was worth it to put my myself down on the page. But do you remember what you read? Like you talked about reading like the sort of like the canon or whatever of like French literature. Like, did you read contemporary poems that were being written in Haiti when you were a teenager?
So different things happened when I considered that I became free to write poetry. So the first thing was to realize that you could play around with poems, right? You could have a poem as a story. You could follow certain rules, or you could just write a free poem. But also realizing that a lot of the songs that I was listening to were actually written by poets, because they were poems, right? So I think that my first exposure to contemporary poetry was through songs, because Haitian music is really rich in that sense that the songs are actually poems when you dissect them, as opposed to, I guess, something more commercial. They're really they really stick to the aesthetics of the lyrics. And I mostly read classical poets, though, when it came to the books I was choosing, because those were the ones recommended to me mostly. It wasn't until I moved to the United States and I attended FIU, Florida International University, and took my first formal poetry class there, that I was introduced to modern poets. And actually my teacher, Denise Duhamel, her entire class was just modern poets, and it was a breath of fresh air, because I was so used to studying people I could not necessarily relate to, being able to discover voices that were modern and speaking of issues that I was myself facing. That was just great. And I saw you applaud. I'm assuming you know Denise.
Yeah, there's a poem of hers in the book, in the attitude chapter. It's
Oh, wow.
It's called I've Been Known. And actually, I met her when she came to read up in Vermont, here in Brattleboro. And to be honest, this book, that was conceived before the pandemic, and I actually had a dream of like going to Florida and see. I know Florida is a big state, but I was thinking that you and Denise, and I think there may even be a couple of other poets in the book, that we could all do a in-person reading. But I had no idea that you were her student. That's
Yeah.
another synchronicity.
This is so amazing.
Yeah.
The first book that she wrote that I read was Kaching, and it was so funny and touching and deep. Yeah. Are you going to read a poem maybe?
I could read Denise's poem that's in the book, and let me get it. So yeah, it's in that attitude chapter, which it has this great, this girl with her hands on her hips, and I actually, there's a lot of talk in my house, like there are dress codes for girls in high school, where you can't have a bra strap showing or whatever. So the idea that like, yeah, here's this girl in her bra, and then there she is just looking right out at you, totally beautiful. So I will read Denise Duhamel. I can find it. Okay, here we go. I've been known to spread it on thick, to shoot off my mouth, to get it off my chest, to tell him where to get off, to stay put, to face the music, to cut a shine, to go under, to sell myself short, to play myself down, to paint the town, to fork over, to shell out, to shoot up, to pull a fast one, to go haywire, to take a shine to be stuck on, to glam it up, to vamp it up, to get her one better, to eat a little higher on the hog, to win out, to get away with, to go to the spot, to make a stake, to make a stand, to stand up for something, to stand up for, to snow under, to slip up, to go for it, to take a stab at it, to try out, to go places, to play up, to get back at, to size up, to stand off, to slop over, to be solid with, to lose my shirt, to get myself off the hook. I have never read that poem out loud. If you see it on the page, it's tricky. The line breaks are, it's all just like one long, powerful run on. Yeah, there's no punctuation. So it's actually fun to have all those words come just pummeling out. And Denise is just one of the great feminist poets of our time. And it's really been what I realized when I was putting this book together, and I didn't like pitch this to my, I had to write a book proposal to get this anthology going with Workman, and I didn't use the words when I was pitching it, but my mission was to have an intersectional feminist perspective, and that I wanted that to come through in the poems and in the voices without saying those words. Like I didn't want it to be conceived of as like, oh, this is too out there. So I felt like I was kind of sneaky that way. But MJ, I wanted to go back and ask, in terms of some of the poems that you read to us, and some of the other poems that are in Happy Okay, how can poetry help us reimagine our personal history through language, or transform painful experiences from the past into something different?
Well, I've been using poetry to heal. I've been using writing to heal my entire life. As you know, I was born in Haiti, which is such a complicated place to be born in. It's a beautiful place, and people over there are so awesome. There's a spirit that you feel when you're um, in Haiti. It just cannot be explained. As soon as I land there, I feel so inspired just because the earth itself seems to be just um, calling to you in a different way. So uh, in there was a lot of beauty, but there was also a lot of violence in Haiti. And I come from a very dysfunctional family. Of course, people will say everybody does, but there was a lot of violence at home. So it was particularly dysfunctional. And when I found out that I could use writing to just um, kind of change the way I was thinking about myself, about my life, I really studied writing and never stopped. At first, it was fiction, just kind of writing about the life I wanted. Then, in my teenage years, I started writing poetry about love because it was difficult to believe in love coming from a house that was so um, that was just violent, right? Just believing that you're worth loving, that there is love for you out there. But writing about it really made it better. So I've always used it to heal. And when I found out that my depression was not just a teenage depression, that I was going to have to deal with well into adulthood, that it was going to be permanent, which can be such a scary word when you realize, oh, there's something going on with my brain in addition to my personal experience that makes it difficult for me to just be quote unquote normal. So I had to add writing to my regimen just to be able to deal with the depression because it's never going to go away. It comes and goes. But when it goes, it's just in the background in my life. So I use it to reframe a lot of the dark thoughts that I have, just trying to focus on the positive, or sometimes it's about the lesson that can be learned from those moments of distress or terror, right? So I wanted to be able to write poems that would not only bring support to people who are dealing with depression, but also bring some clarity to people who live with someone who has depression, because they suffer too. It's not easy to live with someone with depression. It really isn't. And so I've been using poetry just to live a balanced life, and it works. I mean, as soon as you make it a part of your daily life, um, it's I know it's cliche when people say poetry saved me, but it did so many times.
Oh my gosh. That I feel like that comes through in the poems, even the kind of writing the manifesto to the self. I will practice self-talk so that that we as the reader get to watch the speaker, making the promise to the self and then going through that. It's it's really a journey. And for someone like me, in terms of realizing that depression, that mood disorder there's not some magical cure. It's not like chicken pox, like you get it once. It cycles through.
And I wish I had known a little bit of that early, right? When I was in my teenage years, that there was a way to deal with certain things, and that it's okay to feel bad, that you don't have to always be happy. That's just not how life works. I feel that as a teenager, it was this always seeking happiness, always seeking that feeling that you're in control and that life is okay. Sometimes it's just okay for things to be in chaos, because that the universe is chaos, right? And I'm really excited about the anthology because here's a book that really addresses some of the preoccupations, some of the feelings that we deal with in our teenage years. I had no book like this growing up, some like a manual, like a guide. And I I'm so glad you put this project together. It's wonderful. As an educator, I have dealt and I still deal with so many situations when kids just feel lost and they want to be listened to and they want to know that they're not alone in their experience. And a book like this carries the message that no, what you're going through might feel like it's just you and you're alone, but it's universal. And um, even if your situation has its particulars, you're surrounded. There are people like you, and it's okay that you're not okay.
I love that. It's okay that you're not okay. Yeah, I've been thinking about just being messy and imperfect, and that's how we live. So yeah, for as we wrap up, going back to wanting to show really anybody, but especially young people, that they're not alone in their loneliness, in their questioning, their shame and rage and desire and sadness and all of that, and that there's still belonging, and that's, I think, why belonging was the last chapter, because all of those other things are also true. It's not like a progression, like you do each one and then you finally get to belonging. Like it's all of those things, we contain multitudes. And like the wild of geese, that line at the end about, I'm not going to be able to quote from Mary Oliver, announcing your place in the family of things, that that we can look around, and whether it's the animals or the sky or the moon. And I love that in your poem where you go on the hike and you're part of the bougainvillea and all the growing things. So I realize it's time to wrap up, unless there are any last questions from anyone in the audience. Maybe it's time to say goodbye for tonight. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming on this Sunday. And thank you so much, Sarah, and the Sundog Poetry Center. Especially if you're from Vermont and you're not familiar with Sundog, go and visit their website and get on their mailing list. They have great, and they do writing, poetry contests, and really a lot of great resources. Oh, and thank you. Someone came from Seattle. That's so great. People from other and gratitude to MJ and to Joy, who's now her satyr, for sharing your poems for this collection and with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.
That was really fun. I'm so happy to see the inside. Thanks for screen sharing and
oh, really? Okay, good.